You're listening to the Coach's Journey podcast, exposing the struggles and celebrating the successes in the life of coaches who are action takers and creating authentic impact in today's world. Whether you're just starting out, expanding your reach, or exploding your impact, you're in the right place right now. Stay tuned and be sure to subscribe to this podcast. Now, here are your hosts of the Coach's Journey podcast.
Coaches Nation, hey, it's Daniel here. I'm here with Dr. Sherry Flewellen, and I'm Daniel Fernandez, and we are going to have an amazing podcast for you today, all about challenging clients. And challenging clients is something that many coaches, A, struggle with, or B, don't actually do much, because there could be a variety of reasons. Maybe you are a little bit not confident in challenging that client. Maybe that client is like better than you at this one thing, so you don't know how to challenge. Maybe you're not good at challenging in your own life, so you need to step up your skill set and challenge. But whatever the reason that you challenge or don't challenge in your life, today's podcast is going to be amazing because we're going to talk about all the different components and ways to challenge your clients, how to do it, why it's important, and different ways that we've challenged our clients. So you're going to get a lot about it. You're going to probably get 5 or 10 tips on how to challenge in different ways. I bet you at least 2 or 3 of those you haven't thought of or haven't done recently enough. And we're going to be pulling from our clients that we have either failed to challenge or challenge really well. So,
and quite frankly, our own experience, because there have been plenty of times when I've been challenged well, and I'm not in the mind space to be challenged. So like, I think we can self-reflect a little bit on what's worked for us.
Yeah. So this is going to be a really exciting podcast. If you haven't yet joined our school community, this is an amazing community for coaches. We are moving our entire community off of Facebook. We have so many members there, but we want to take advantage of the features of school, and Facebook is really changing. So we're going to be talking about that more in our content on school, but like why Facebook is changing and why we're changing as a result. But if you want to be part of an amazing community of coaches that really care to serve and want to make an impact and want to help other coaches succeed collaboratively, then a school is an amazing community that you need to consider joining. In the meantime, Dr. Sherry, are you excited for this podcast? You muted yourself. You're so excited you pressed mute by accident.
I'm excited I pressed mute. I'm so excited because I even can reflect back on yesterday. I had a discovery session with a couple, and the whole thing was she was being like, she is at an emotional overwhelmed state, but she's challenging herself and she's not sure how she's going to manage. And I had both her and her husband on, and so I was getting to work with both of them, and then he challenged me about challenging her. Like it was really fascinating and interesting.
I want to know what happened. Like can you give a little bit of details, like how that dynamic happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So the short version where she's at is she's an investor, real estate investor, and she had another business and she's jumping into this. She has a history of having a very low confidence based on kind of how she was raised. And she has been seeing a therapist for years and years and years and years. And the challenge they're at is that she says, she acknowledges she has more tools in her tool belt to help with anxiety, to help with boundaries with her relationship with her parents and these sorts of things, but she's still not at a place emotionally where she wants to be. And so she's feeling overwhelmed, even though she continually adds things to her plate. So she's like, I'm challenging myself. Am I challenging myself too much? Like, can I take this? And then husband then also reiterated, like she's already been doing these things and she's made some progress, some growth, but not as much. So how is coaching going to be any different? Like, how would your process help her actually move further than she has?
He challenged you right at the beginning.
He did. Well, this was towards the end. And so, of course, he asks me this question, and, we're already slightly over time. And I'm like thinking to myself, how am I going to like instill confidence super quickly? And so, but this is why, from my perspective, this is why clients want to work with me, and probably most coaches, is that they want to be challenged, meaning they want to grow, and their ability to challenge themselves and their ability to grow at the rate and at the level they want is insufficient to what they want. They know they can do more. They know, and they're looking for that support. So our role in our job, I think, is to challenge most of the time. I mean, I think there are some situations where it's not about challenge, but I think when I think about the growth and the arc of a coaching journey, which is exactly what this podcast is about, the coach's journey. It's about challenging ourselves and our clients.
Yeah, I love that, Sherry. And I think challenge sometimes as a word, sometimes has a negative connotation. Sometimes it gets a bad rap. Oh, he challenged me. Oh, it was like, this is so challenging. But in this context, what we're talking about today, if we talk about like what we mean by challenge. Challenge doesn't mean like threatening. It means helping your clients see something they might not have wanted to see, or maybe it means pushing back on a client. Maybe it means helping them see a path forward that they couldn't really, they didn't want to commit to, or helping them, reminding them that they're capable of more.
Yeah.
Challenging is like kind of like asking people to step up in a way they might not have stepped up if you hadn't said that, right? Or if you hadn't done that. That's kind of what I'm thinking as a definition.
Agreed. But I will say, Daniel, that when you said this isn't about like threatening, what I've experienced though is sometimes my clients or potential clients are challenging themselves appropriately enough but they actually trigger that threatening like response in them because they don't have necessarily the mindset or the tools that can undergird their own level of challenging. So they're challenging themselves and then like kind of regretting it because now they
themselves. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm certainly not trying to trigger the fight or flight response in my clients, but they're pretty good at doing it to themselves.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I've noticed, I've had quite a few sessions with female entrepreneurs recently, and the theme is overwhelm because of their own level of kind of challenging themselves. And so it's like taking that fight or flight that they've created and figuring out how to deactivate that or harness that in a way that's going to work for them instead of kind of, working against them.
Yeah, but I can, his question to you is, how is that going to be any different with you? Challenge is part of the equation, but I can see how using a coach would actually be completely different, especially if a coach is going to walk you through the step-by-step of what it is that you're creating and what you need to spend your time on and what you don't, and how to cut those things away and how to manage your time. These are things that, I would say most therapists aren't like, versed in time management specifically, but they can help you get to the place where you need to do time management. And there's some therapists that do probably work in time management, but a time management piece is useful and more likely for a coach to be able to help with that. So I can totally see like a piece of that, but people think time management is a challenge where it's actually not time management. It's priority management and knowing what you want and all these things, right?
Yes.
So there's so much more to it, but part of it is the process you're going to take them through. Like if somebody asked me that question at the end of the session, I say like, well, let me ask you this question. How was this session different from everything else you've ever done?
That's a great question.
Them on their challenge, right? How did you handle it, Sherry?
How did I handle it? Well, honestly, what I explained is that, throwing a bunch of tools at a problem can be helpful. And I actually gave him kind of some examples from my own life about my own journey as becoming a mom and getting overwhelmed because of a perspective that I had of who I should be based on what my parents were. And so that part of this journey is her really solidifying and identifying who she wants to be. And how I talked about it is that she's measuring herself to her parents' ruler, and she needs to come up with her own measuring stick and what she's measuring herself against rather than taking somebody else's. And so I said, when you change your perspective and what you're measuring against, that's not just like a quantitative change, it's a qualitative change. And so that's kind of how I framed it.
I love that. And something we were talking about ahead of time is part of challenging is listening.
Yes.
Part of challenging is listening, because you can challenge all day long without listening and you're not really challenging, you're just spouting.
Yes. And I had this experience just a few days ago. I was a member kind of / facilitator, a co-facilitator of a mastermind. And in a traditional mastermind, what it is everybody has a chance. Most people have a chance to be on the hot seat. Like, what are you struggling with? And we share a little bit about what we're struggling with in our business. And then there's clarifying questions. And then there's people just getting to offer their perspective or they can challenge or they, whatever it is, like everybody gets to participate in whatever makes sense. And there was one person that was participating by providing information to one of the other people. And they just went from listening to the problem to like kind of advising and like saying, well, did you think about this and this and this and this? And I was like, I remember thinking like there was a whole lot of questions and assumptions. Well, there's a whole lot of assumptions that happened that this person never really clarified or asked about or whatever. They just like, how do you know they haven't even tried that or that they haven't thought, like I just noticed that there was this huge leap, in thought process that happened with this other person, and they're not a coach. So I get that they don't have, they are literally a business owner that's participating in a mastermind. But so it was interesting seeing that dynamic play out because they weren't listening well enough to like ask the questions to fill in the gaps.
Which highlights actually the difference between a coach and I was gonna say a regular human, but coaches are regular humans. But a coach and a non-coach is the way that you listen and challenge. Because a coach's way of challenge is different from the general public's way of challenge. The general public's way of challenging is like, I need to tell you that I'm right. You need to do, here's my advice to you, even though you didn't ask for it. And I don't know anything about you. I don't know what you really want in life, but do this. That's kind of like what people think challenging is. And it's not effective because it creates resistance, which kind of brings us to another point that we talked about, which is like, where's the mindset of the person that you're challenging?
Yeah.
Right. That's a real, and Sherry touched on this, like knowing the right time to challenge and the right time not to challenge, or how to get people to a place where you can challenge them, because everybody needs to be challenged. That's why they're here, right? Like you said, but they might come in. This happened to me literally yesterday. I had a client who came into a session and they were super, super discouraged. It had been a while since our last session, and they came in and they were just like very, very discouraged, and they were stuck in like, this is not going to work. How am I going to do it? How it's like not going to work. And it took actually a really long time. And I tried a whole bunch of things, some of which worked, some of which did not work. And eventually I felt a little bit of a shift. Like they weren't as negative, and it was enough for us to move into a little bit of brainstorming. So somewhere along the way, I challenged a little bit, but I was struggling because it was, sometimes you have to take your time. And I didn't want to take my time because we only had a limited time together. And so like, I wanted to get them moving forward. And there's a piece of patience that's involved. That's what I'm getting at, is that there was like, I had a sense of impatience within myself, which I was aware of, which is why I tried to take my time more. But I could sense that it's like, I wanted to move faster than the client's emotional being was ready to go.
Yes.
And so when I do that, my tendency tends to be, I tend to go find something intellectual. So in that moment, what I actually started with the opposite, which I was really proud of. I have to acknowledge my tendency there and be like, why am I impatient here? Let me get out of my head and try to get back to their heart. And so I spent some time acknowledging them for all the work they have done. I spent time explaining, like, you've been in hard situations before, haven't you? And we talked about them and had them talk about things that they've accomplished. And they, eventually started saying some things, but there were these long segments of pauses, right? There was long segments of pauses. And later in the session, I learned they were actually muting so they could shed some tears. And I was like, well, that, and like we've cried together in sessions before, like, you don't have to be embarrassed about where you're at. Like, you shed your tears with me, because that's like, I need to know where you're at, and I acknowledge you and I respect the journey that you're on. These tears that you shed with me in the past and today too, that's really important. Like, acknowledge that it's hard. It's super hard. Like, there's no simple solution to this, right? If there's a simple solution, you would have done it, right? But you're on this journey for a reason, because they have something big they're trying to do, right? And so acknowledging and getting them to like feel heard and listened to, I was a part of that process. It took me like 40 minutes to feel like I got them to a place where we could brainstorm. And I didn't feel that until that point.
Yeah, no, I
that's
think
hard for me as a coach, but I had to be patient. And I don't think I was patient enough, because at one point I actually used this tactic, which actually does work sometimes, which is, hey, if there was somebody else who's in your exact situation, what would you tell them? And there's a long pause. We have to give them a name. We made up a name for this person. And it was still hard. So that one didn't work. So I had to shift gears and try a bunch of other things. But you gotta try a bunch of things to get your client to the place where you can challenge.
I think that honestly is probably one of the biggest, I would say maybe one of the biggest takeaways for myself, as well as hopefully for our listeners, is assessing their readiness to really actually be challenged. And so I'm just thinking about, even in myself, one of the biggest challenges that I have right now for me is my health. My thyroid has been off for a while. I've been aware of it now for about a year, and I'm still trying, I still don't think it's where it needs to be, which is then impacting my energy. It's impacting how I feel. It's impacting weight. It's impacting all these things. And it's just like, it's something I've been frustrated about for quite some time. Well, I'm in this women's group of entrepreneurs, and we meet every couple weeks. And it's interesting because there's actually another coach in this group as well. And I've noticed that she jumps to problem solving very quickly, because I'm here in this group and so I will shed tears. This is still an issue. I'm still frustrated. I'm still trying to why is my healthy eating and tracking all of that stuff, and my exercising I'm doing, it's not sufficient like it used to be. And I'm just frustrated. And so then she's brought up, oh, well, this is the exercise program that I'm doing. And then another one of the gals will jump in and she's like, oh, well, this is the nutritionist weight loss group that I joined, whatever. And my readiness for that information is so not there, because I'm overwhelmed. I'm frustrated. Yeah, I know. In my mind, there's no reason why what I'm doing shouldn't be working. There's still some hormonal stuff that has to figure. And so it's just interesting because I'm sharing this stuff, but I feel like I'm getting that intellectual, as you're talking, I'm getting these intellectual, ideas back, which is not where I'm at. And it's not addressing what I need in the moment. And so I think our ability to attend to and recognize where our client is emotionally, have they processed where they're at enough, and are now they open to the logical problem solving, or do they still need to deal with the emotions, the guilt, the overwhelm, the shame, the whatever, the grace, the beating up yourself of oneself, whatever is going on. When that's still fully present, I don't know that at least with a lot of the women, now maybe, I don't know, there could be a little bit of a gender difference here with kind of the man problem solving versus the woman problem solving. What do you think, Daniel?
So first of all, Sherry, I want to really acknowledge what you just said. First of all, being vulnerable on a podcast like that, I respect that you've given other people that view into yourself. That can be inspiring to them, but also, I'm sorry you're going through all that. It does not sound fun. And one of the reasons I say that is because I really mean it. But the other one is because I'm demonstrating something that you do before you go to give people advice.
Yes.
Right. Which is, I need to be okay with that. But also it needs to be said, Sherry, you're going through a hard time. It's not fun. It's not easy. There's no simple answers. And that's overwhelming. And that's going to affect everything in your life.
Yeah.
No simple way, no other way to put it. Right. That being said, now if I was coaching you, the thing my brain did when you started talking about it, I was like, oh, thyroid. How can I look up thyroid online and find out where's the resource, where's the book? And that was I have a conditioned pattern in the past that I would do that. And if I haven't slept well, sometimes that comes up stronger. If I haven't eaten well, sometimes it comes up stronger. So your old conditionings will come up when you're not taking care of yourself. It's another part of challenging is self-care.
Yes.
Interestingly, but if I'm in a good space or I'm being more conscious or intentional, I can just put those thoughts aside and come back to the person in front of me. And what are they going through? Be with them. Make sure they are there, knowing that you're being with them. And when we get through that, and Sherry has come back on the other side of that, then we can start talking about what's your next step if we want to.
Yeah.
And maybe there's more to cover. Maybe there's tell me a couple of things that really have made a difference, if anything. Or, what would you, or we could even talk about the people in that group and say, what would you like for their response to have been?
Yeah.
And then, do you want that to change in that group? There's so many different ways we could go with this. Are we working on thyroids? Are we working on health? Are we working on group dynamics and influence? Are we working on you just handling yourself? Are you working on you being productive and making this into a project in your life? There's so many different ways we could go with this, and knowing your client, what they actually think is important, is part of that journey, right? And
Absolutely.
so like whatever it is we were deciding, basing it on what's important to the client, what matters now, having a sense for that will help you get to the place where you're going to challenge the right thing too.
Absolutely. And challenging the right thing, and I don't think it's like there is the right thing, but challenging it in a way that's the most healthy for the client at the moment. Because going back to this whole like health journey, I have a nutritionist, dietitian gal that I meet with periodically. And I remember towards the beginning of my meeting with her, just crying and being frustrated and like, like beating myself up, like, why isn't this working? Doing all of the self-pity things. And she challenged me, and it was not in the way I expected. Her challenge was, this is hard. How can you have more grace on yourself? And I was like, whoa, what?
Boom.
Because I'm so used to like, yeah, the tactical problem solving, like that's my mode too. And so sometimes the challenge isn't really like moving forward per se, but it's around acceptance, like challenge and acceptance, or challenge and, just sticking with the mess right now.
Taking the breaths and being with that problem and being okay with it, and recognizing that it's part of your journey, and it's a challenge that you need to rise up to, but it's not the thing that needs to derail your sense of well-being.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
I love that. And actually, you're making me think. There's a framework. There's like a step-by-step there. Number one is acknowledge, right? And number two is go for the emotions. Emotional first,
Yeah.
right? Not just acknowledge, but like respect those emotions, honor those emotions, and then make it okay, and lift that person up in that moment, just as a human, right? Like together in that relationship, that connection. Then figure out what is most important to them and work towards that in wherever you go next. What's important about this, given what you know of this client? Like if you know that this client needs to take some grace and some self-care, then maybe that's where you go first, right? That's on the emotional side, right? I would say.
Absolutely.
But it could also become tactical. You'd be like, what's the one thing you need to do?
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you, Sherry, what's the one thing you need to do to give yourself grace on this? Right?
Yeah.
Like, can you answer? Might as well.
The one thing I need to do.
You don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like put on the spot, but
that's an example of not asking permission for coaching. but that's where we could go, right?
Yeah.
And then that's when the ideating starts in the cloud. Now you're in a positive, creative space, right? That's the reason I asked that question, Sherry, to demonstrate like, if you're in that space where grace is like, okay, we accept the need to give ourselves grace. Now, how could we do that?
Yes.
Right? And not just right now in this moment, but like after the session, going forward, maybe as a practice, maybe as a habit. So that's like the transition to now you're in a positive creative space. And now that you're giving yourself grace and you're going to give yourself grace, now you're more equipped to be able to handle whatever's coming at you. And so then this session, or maybe next session, we can talk about like, what is the project of the thyroid going to be about?
Yes.
And what are the different aspects of that we could do? Let's pick one and experiment with that one as the top priority experiment, right? Like that's where we could go with that. Now that you're positive and ready for it, right?
Yes. And let me just put a little neuroscience to what you were saying too, just to come at it from a different perspective. And that is like when we are highly emotional, our amygdala is where our emotions reside. That's where, and that kind of can overwhelm every other process in our brain. And so in order for us to problem solve effectively, we have to find ways for our emotions to settle down a little bit instead of feeling like this big ball of overwhelmingness. And so once our emotions settle down a little bit, our prefrontal cortex, which is where our decision making, our logical thought process, prioritizing, all of that sort of stuff happens, that is able to now more effectively be activated. So literally, if we are way too emotional to being, in the moment, it's overriding our ability to be logical. It's just like if you're trying to challenge somebody when they're overwhelmed, it just adds to the overwhelm. So there is this flow from highly emotional to having like a different perspective, feeling those emotions aren't overwhelming, and then being able to shift our brain literally into problem solving mode, which then allows for more creativity in the problem solving. So I just kind of wanted to speak to those processes that happen.
Love that. Totally agree with that, Sherry. That's a really good point about, it's not just about you being subject to overwhelm. It's your brain is designed to be able to escape lions, so like we have these biological adaptations that we basically need to adapt to ourselves.
Absolutely.
Right. And there's so many tools, as we just discussed. So
There's lots of tools, and really our best tool though is ourselves as the coach. And the more emotionally intelligent and aware and interactive we are in that space, that's really where the power comes from in coaching.
And that's about being connected and present, right? Staying present to what's really here with your client is the foundation for it all.
Absolutely. And so if you're listening to this, you are a coach. Otherwise, you wouldn't care what we're saying right now. You wouldn't even be listening to the podcast.
Or maybe, Terry, I'll challenge you on that and say, like, they might actually have thought it was interesting from a human dynamics point of view if they weren't a coach. And maybe now, like, what is this coaching thing? This sounds interesting.
That is possible. But the fact that our podcast is called the Coach's Journey Podcast, they're most likely coaches. And so I want you to reflect. Yeah. As a coach, I want you to reflect on how much support and challenge do you have in your life as a coach? Because most of the coaches that we are around, we're part of a community called the Coaching Mastery Community. Most of the coaches that we're around have expressed, and I feel this myself, I don't naturally have a whole bunch of coaches around me that understand me, understand what I do, get the complexity of what I do and how that impacts every area of my life. I don't have people naturally that understand that. So in order for me to be challenged as a coach to grow and to get even more experience and nuanced improvement and mastery, I need to be around other coaches. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, this sounds amazing, but how do I don't know what that process looks like. I encourage you to jump over to coachingmasterycommunity.com. We have an amazing community of coaches that challenges each other so that we don't stay in overwhelm, we don't feel stuck, we don't feel frustrated, but where we are able to grow in our coaching journey and in our businesses so that we can then continue to help more clients and to gain a richness in what we do.
Yeah. And coaches in our community, we challenge each other, right? Like, not only as humans to grow, but as coaches to grow professionally.
Yes.
It's a professional development community. And something like the coaching chain that we run for a pro membership, every session you run it, and then you have this coaching mastery discussion where you're challenging each other to get better. What happened in that session? What went well? What needs work? And what do we learn? And how can we apply that going forward? That raises our whole community up because everybody in the chain is doing that. And we talk about what's going on. So we're challenging each other as coaches. And that's really important. If you're a coach and do not have coaches challenging you as a coach to grow in your life, in a community where people are actively communicating with you personally, then you really need to look at Coaching Mastery Community, because that is like an essential component of your coaching professional development if you're in this as a career.
Absolutely. We thank you so much for your time, energy, and attention to this podcast. The fact that you're listening to this tells us that you have a growth mindset around what you do. And that is amazing and what is needed in our industry.
So thanks for listening. And for more information, check us out at coachingmasterycommunity.com.
See you next time.
You're listening to the Coach's Journey Podcast.